Sure, today I show up to hang out with Mickey. And where is he to be found? Where is he to be found? I'm here before you today, Mickey. I'm rope dropping this morning, as you can see, everybody filing in behind me, to do something that you can only do inside of Disneyland. It exists in no other Disney theme park, a Disneyland original, and an original to the theme park industry. Let's get in here and get today's adventure started. I'm excited. And ironically, traffic trouble is the reason why it showed up. Not the actual film Traffic Trouble, but the idea that Disneyland was having trouble with its traffic. It was insanely popular. People kept showing up. And even though Walt didn't want to do traditional theme park attractions, he started to think, maybe I do need one thrill ride. Everyone knows Walt Disney's attention to detail. He felt as if his park just was missing something that it needed. And today's story also pays tribute to one of the original women of the Disneyland design team. Miss Harriet Burns was the creator of the model and sculpture that today's attraction was based off of. Compared making the model to like making a cake, full of layers, kept getting it improved, kept making bigger ones until a real one showed up at Disneyland. It is crazy to think that at some point in Harriet Burns' career, she's just working on a little small scale model that becomes a bigger model, then a larger model, and then one day becomes an iconic weenie of the Disneyland park. And I hate the term weenie. I'm gonna have to come up with something that is better than Walt's term for an item that draws you closer into the theme park, brings you deeper and deeper into Walt's vision, like all these folks right here that are being magnetically drawn into Sleeping Beauty's castle, but also its next door neighbor, the focus of today's show.
May you experience all the adventure, wonder, and joy that your heart and imagination can hold. Thank you, and welcome to Disneyland.
Now you show up, Mickey, but I got things to do. So greetings, fellow citizens of Disneyland. Brickey here, today looking at the history and design of Disney's first mountain, Matterhorn Mountain, and the world's first ever tubular steel roller coaster. I know you've heard that like 1,000 times. Today I'm going to explain exactly what that means and how this little mountain not only reinvented the way that Disney parks would be designed, but it also reinvented the way that theme park attractions and roller coasters would be designed in every country that has a modern theme park. Let's jump in. Walt Disney's vision for what he wanted Disneyland to be was absolutely so unique and so special for the time. It's a template that still holds up today. Not only in Disney parks, but theme parks all around planet Earth. And like everything with Disneyland, it's a little jigsaw puzzle. Incredibly small park located in the city of Anaheim that wasn't a city when it first came here. It was farm country, but a city accidentally sprouted up all around it. And so because it is a jigsaw puzzle, every piece of the puzzle somehow has to fit into the one next to it. And today's story begins with Sleeping Beauty Castle. So we all now know just how tiny Sleeping Beauty Castle is, right? I mean, if you've been out to Orlando and you've seen the Magic Kingdom, I mean, hey, Florida real estate, right? You get a lot more for your buck out in Florida than you do in the ultra expensive Southern California. But the idea always was to make Walt's castle, the original Disney castle, feel as tall as possible. So therefore, they took all the ground around it and mounded it up to give a little bit of extra berth to Sleeping Beauty Castle. The idea was to make it feel as absolutely tall as possible and to get a little extra boost with earth underneath it versus concrete, purchased materials. Disneyland was built inside of 1 year. The year of 1954, this orange grove would transform into Disneyland, now visited by millions of people all around the world. It was done on an incredible budget, done as fast as possible, and one of the things that they cut back on was the scale of the castle, not knowing what this would come into. So putting it up on a mound of dirt, putting it up on a pedestal, gave it a little extra oomph that it would need. Because as you travel down Main Street, you notice that the castle sits up higher, so that the forest perspective of all the buildings has a vanishing point, which is Sleeping Beauty's castle. Horse is faster than I thought. Oh, they didn't stop. That must be the express. So the magic trick of Main Street USA having forced perspective works in a way where it elevates the scale of Sleeping Beauty's castle. So as you look down through this illustration that comes to life in Main Street USA, the castle is the vanishing point or the focal point, putting all of your attention into the castle when you come in. It's the big reveal, the thing that was designed to lure you into the hub, where then each spoke of the hub gives you an option to choose a different adventure. We see this replicated in Magic Kingdom, but we don't see this replicated in some of the parks that I feel like are a little bit weak on the design, such as Disney's California Adventure. So if we do the common sense life math on Sleeping Beauty Castle, you dig out all of the earth around me to create the moat around the castle and to also pad it up on a pedestal, but there's a lot more dirt left over all of this digging and this little pad that it sits on. So what do you do with 20 feet of dirt, over 2 stories of dirt? Well, you put it next door and you call it Holiday Hill. And if you think about it, it's a pretty extensive footprint that Sleeping Beauty Castle takes up, but also when you think about the waterway or the irrigation system that exists all around it to make it feel more castle-ish, that would be a lot of dirt. And when you're working on a fast timeline and an incredibly tight budget, mounding all the dirt up right here and creating Holiday Hill, where you simply place some benches, a little bit of flowers and slight design decoration, and now you have a lookout point. And somebody also took it upon themselves at the very, very top to plant marijuana plants. That's right, according to Bob Gurr, this icon was once a small marijuana field inside of Disneyland. Now that's a crazy fun fact. Walt Disney absolutely hated just a pile of dirt in his park. It was not exactly what he envisioned. He knew he could do better. As always, he wanted to hold himself to a higher standard. And along the way, trying to figure out what to do with this parcel of land, as always, he came up with some pretty crazy ideas. Also, if you notice, the monorail pedestals in front of the Matterhorn are extremely short compared to the ones that are on the back of the Matterhorn to make the peak of the mountain feel even taller. So one of Walt's crazy ideas about what to replace Holiday Hill with was the idea of, hey, let's just put some snow up here and then we can somehow turn this into like a toboggan ride or a sled ride. And Admiral Joe Fowler was like, Walt, it's Anaheim, it's hot, snow's gonna melt, it's gonna create flooding, it's gonna be a disaster. But it didn't stop him. He eventually figured out how to put snow in this location. So one day, a cast member walked up and saw Walt Disney sitting on a bench inside of Tomorrowland, and he was staring up in an empty sky. And the cast member said, "What are you staring at, Walt?" And Walt replied, "My mountain," which is pretty funny to think about if this isn't here. But the man had a vision, and even though a thrill ride kind of went against his early design principle of everything should be accessible to every guest, he did start to realize that maybe there were different ways to cater to various guest needs, and some guests are ride rippers. They just need to feel the adrenaline and the excitement, and why couldn't Walt offer that to them inside of his precious Disneyland? So just imagine seeing Walt Disney sitting on a park bench staring at this, but in his imagination, Walt saw this. Some imagination, huh? Eventually, Walt would find his vision of a mountain in 1958 when he went to the set of Third Man on the Mountain and spent a week there. It's a film about a young man determined to scale the slopes that had killed his father. Kind of a, I can step inside of your footsteps and do what you didn't and finish your story type of story. The fictional mountain used in the movie was called the Citadel, but it was themed after the Matterhorn. As much as the Matterhorn story is one of creative problem solving and great theme park design that revolutionized both Disney parks and the world of theme park entertainment, it's also a story of customer service and realizing that you need to meet every customer's needs to make a place that would endure as long as Disneyland has, and how it's created the perfect template for the Disney theme parks that are now all around planet Earth. Imagine if Walt Disney would have gotten his way and this would have been turned from Holiday Hill to Snow Hill. It's easy to think how that snow would have created all kind of drainage problems around his Disneyland. So luckily, once again, Admiral Fowler, the heavy hand of Disneyland, talked Walt out of one of his crazy ideas. But was it crazy? Because there is snow today inside of Anaheim every single day of the year, and it's also one of the tallest structures inside of Anaheim. Matterhorn is one of the few attractions that's visible from outside the berm, where guests going up and down Harbor and over on Highway 5 can catch a glimpse of the Matterhorn and its snowy peak as it rests above as the tallest lookout of Disneyland. So Walt Disney would be inspired by the Matterhorn over in Europe. Well, Walt Disney, like a lot of creatives, would be inspired to create Disneyland as he traveled through the world, which is kind of a design principle that I believe in for creative people. It's very hard to see the future when you're stuck in the present. Getting out, traveling will always give a creative a bigger view of the world, creating more inspiration. So the monorail and the Matterhorn are two things that Walt Disney was inspired by traveling through Europe. One, he saw the monorail, but two, looking at the actual Matterhorn gave him the idea of putting a replica inside his park here in Disneyland. And as a creative that loves to get away to find inspiration, I just love it's as simple as that. It's pretty insane to think about what Disneyland would be without the Matterhorn, and what Disney parks would be without the Matterhorn. This attraction really changed the entire game. And one of my all-time favorite Walt Disney stories is when he told the folks back home in Anaheim while he was abroad that he wanted this in his park. So one of my favorite Walt Disney stories about his ambition and his vision and what it must have been like to work with him is when he sends a postcard to Imagineer Vic Green. He sends him a postcard that has two words on it. On the front, it's a photo of the Matterhorn and it says Matterhorn. On the back, it says, "Build this." And I love that it was taken seriously. Not ha-ha, Walt's being funny, but literally, the boss just wrote us and said to build this. Build a mountain. We've all had clients and bosses before in the creative world that were a little vague. That might be one of the most vague creative briefs I've ever seen. What I also love is brevity. Two words, build this. So when Walt Disney sent the postcard over, Admiral Joe Fowler said, fine, we'll build it, but it has to do something to justify it taking up space inside of Disneyland and also taking up budget from Disneyland. So the idea was, we'll not only put one roller coaster inside of it, but we'll put two. So now let's talk about how they actually pulled off building this and what in the hell does tubular steel roller coaster really mean? And why was the Matterhorn the birth of this idea and merger between Walt Disney Imagineering and Aero Development? When Harriet Burns made the very first model of the Matterhorn, it was 1 foot high and she made it like a birthday cake where it was done in layers, so that if one layer didn't get approved, it could be removed, redone, resculpted, and put back together. She would recreate this process over and over again until finally they would have an approved rough sketch of the Matterhorn built in this birthday cake style out of clay. Then they sculpted the big boy, painted it, rendered it, put all the trees around it, really came up with a solid idea of what this would look like. The large model was then cast, and that's what you see here today. This was replicated from a model that started out being made like a birthday cake. But if you look at the Matterhorn now, hearing that, you can see that there are various different layers to it, where you can understand that there's a bottom layer, a second bottom layer, 2 layers in the middle, and then the top peak is made up of about 3 layers. Each layer getting incredibly smaller, creating the forced perspective, making this feel a lot taller than what it is. And now let's talk about the height of the Matterhorn, because it's pretty fascinating to think that a lot of steel buildings that are constructed are made in a way where all the steel beams are the exact same size, because you're essentially erecting a grid up into the air. But with the Matterhorn, all of the various steel beams, and there were a lot of them, were various different sizes. This was like constructing a jigsaw puzzle. So it's pretty crazy to think that this right here, it's actually a building. It's a 15-story building that is built in so many different jig-jags and seesaw pieces and puzzle pieces that to our eye, it really does look like a snow-covered mountain. Amazing. So if you've ever wondered why when you walk through Frontierland, you have to walk up this hill and Big Thunder Mountain is actually dug out down in the ground below you, well, it has a lot to do with Matterhorn. And looky there. Tubes. Steel tubes that a train is running on. Who would have thought of that? And if you've ever wondered why we walk across this bridge going over the boats coming down from soon-to-be Tiana's Bayou Adventure, very, very different than what we see at Walt Disney World, where all of this is exposed inside of the Magic Kingdom. This is designed this way, once again, because of the Matterhorn. When Splash Mountain and both Big Thunder Mountain were put in, Disney carved down into the earth to make sure that these 2 mountains wouldn't rival Matterhorn Mountain. So one of the reasons why you go across this bridge and the other bridge, aside from also hiding a lot of people that are inside of the queue, which the average person is about 5 feet tall, which allows your mind to do simple math how tall a mountain actually is, even when it's fictional, recessing both Splash Mountain and Big Thunder Mountain down below what we perceive as the Earth's baseline created the extra height needed to keep Matterhorn and Sleeping Beauty Castle from being out-towered by Big Thunder Mountain and Splash Mountain. And Splash Mountain in particular, if you think about it, why would you see a tree up in the skyline where you would see the peak of Big Thunder, Matterhorn, Snowcap? This ride in particular really need to be dug down in the ground to keep sight lines consistent and storytelling feeling natural. Friends, I hope you're enjoying today's vlog, history lesson, design breakdown of the Matterhorn. If you enjoy it, do me a favor, please subscribe to this channel. This is pretty niche content. Not a lot of people are looking for this type of stuff. I absolutely love doing it and taking you on the adventure and sharing everything I know about the history and design of Disneyland, but I need your help. You keep showing up, I'll keep making them. What do you say we do a monorail video next? I'll be happy to make one if you promise me that you'll show up. Oh, look who's showing up. Now this next part is where it all gets a little bit abstract in the world of design. Let's start with the problem, which was building a roller coaster inside of a mountain, and then let's work our way over to the solution, which was the tubular steel. It's a pretty interesting design feat to think about Matterhorn and how it came together. Let's dive into this part, and I'll make it as simple as possible to follow along with me, because it's really one of the most fascinating Disneyland attraction stories anyone will ever tell you. So in a very backwards way of building the Matterhorn, they built the mountain first. They had the exterior completely planned out, and then Disney Imagineering was given the quest to do the problem solving, to build the roller coaster inside of the already existing footprint of the mountain. One would normally think you would build a roller coaster and then build a mountain around it, but no, since it had never been done before, they did it the opposite way. Disneyland's Matterhorn is 1/100th scale of Switzerland's Matterhorn, which sits 14,700 feet in the air. Disney's Matterhorn is 147 feet. It's made up of over 2,100 steel girders that make the frame and give Matterhorn Mountain its strength. And nearly all 2,100 were different sizes and lengths to create this jigsaw puzzle of an organic looking mountain that is actually a very well hidden 15-story building. The outside was originally made out of plywood that was then painted and sculpted on the outside of it. But what that left for Aero Development and Disney Imagineers was a very intricate puzzle of space to try to put in not one, but 2 roller coaster tracks. Admiral Joe Fowler knew that this would be something that would be in high demand, and also knew that Disney could use a lot more capacity for guests at Disneyland. So putting in 2 tracks theoretically would mean twice as many guests could enjoy Matterhorn Mountain. Now, this is something they've gotten away from in recent years, as we can see other roller coasters where they do a switch track. Therefore, instead of actually building 2 different tracks operating at the same time, Disney figured out that it's easier to make 2 different loading areas, like what we see over at Big Thunder Mountain or the Incredicoaster, where you use 1 track but load the guests in 2 different locations. A lot more affordable than building the ride twice, and it gives you the capacity that you need because you're always loading a train or cart to get on that track. So because the Matterhorn had such a tight inner space, there was no way to build a wooden roller coaster where essentially you can go as far and as long and as high as you want, but you don't have the flexibility of endless turns. And that's where the steel tube came into play. So with an early sketch of what Matterhorn was going to look like, then Imagineering and Aero was given the task of figuring out how to lay out a track inside of the Matterhorn. But as we pointed out, there's over 2,100 steel girders inside of there. The track would not only need to fit inside the mountain, but it would need to avoid every vertical and horizontal support that kept the mountain standing tall inside of Disneyland. So imagine having 10 months to try to figure out how to put a roller coaster inside of a sketch of this, looking at the architectural blueprint and trying to figure out how to dodge every single support beam that would make the mountain stand tall. And not only that, 2 roller coaster tracks. The most practical idea was to design a lift that would take guests up as high as possible inside of the Matterhorn, and then the 2 paths would go all the way spiraling down for a Fantasyland side and a Tomorrowland side. Absolutely amazing feat of architecture and design if you really put yourself in the mindset of like, this is an incredibly crowded space. How do we make a roller coaster, 2 roller coasters fit inside of it? And that's where the steel comes in. One of my greatest loves about Disneyland is how Disneyland possesses so much problem solving. Creative problem solving is one of the best things that I love from being a designer. You try to figure out the best result to solve a problem that the guest thinks as something that's beneficial to them, not a hindrance, not something that's holding them back from having a good time. Everyone loves the Matterhorn. And so therefore, the idea that came up never made it worse, never cheapened the experience. It only made it better. And that is one of the best things about the Matterhorn and why I love to celebrate this attraction and its achievement. Because a wood roller coaster could never ever make all of the turns and the banks and the curves that were needed to get guests from the lift down to each side of the Matterhorn to get dropped back off in nearly the same spot. So the only way to bend the tracks inside of this incredibly tight footprint was to use something that could just do that, bend. And that's where steel became a part of the Matterhorn. Because as you know, steel can be heated and curved in any direction that's needed, creating all the banks, inclines, twists, and turns that would be needed to get 2 sets of tracks inside of this footprint. So with older traditional roller coasters, they're designed more like a train or a cart rides on top of the track, and the train track takes you on all kinds of twists and turns, but they can't be that tight. They couldn't exist inside of a mountain, nor would it be able to replicate the smoothness that one would feel if they were actually going down a mountain on a bobsled through snow and ice. It would need to be a very smooth ride. And theoretically, for the time, it was smooth, even though by today's standards, it's a little bit of a chiropractor job. But the steel tubes created another problem to solve, as they realized they couldn't run steel wheels on a steel rail because it would be way too bumpy and way too noisy. That means they needed to figure out a rubber solution. As they would run tests on small sections, they realized that a traditional rubber wheel just wouldn't last and keep up with the demand that a roller coaster at Disneyland would surely have. That's when they came up with the idea of using polyurethane, which was a relatively new plastic in manufacturing in America that originated from Germany in World War II. So working in partnership with DuPont, they were able to figure out a proprietary urethane wheel that would actually ride on this steel beam. But if you notice, the polyurethane wheel rolls on top of the steel tube, giving you the smooth ride. But all of the lifting is done on the mechanism that hits the horizontal plane. So there's actually two sets of wheels making the Matterhorn work. The vertical wheel and then the horizontal wheel that does all of the lifting on the incline and helps the braking process. And yes, they did put a pool of water in the attraction to cool down the brake pads, as once you make it up to the peak, it is a free fall the whole way down. Matterhorn uses gravity to do its work and water to cool off the work from said gravity. So believe it or not, with Matterhorn's reputation of being a very rough ride, this two-wheel system was actually designed to make it much smoother. So unlike traditional roller coasters, where the roller coaster sits on top of the tracks, the Matterhorn's main mechanism exists in between the tracks, making it actually a horizontal ride mechanism than a traditional vertical ride system. I know, math, right? You didn't think you were gonna get that today. But next time you get on the Matterhorn or you're waiting to ride, look below the sled and you'll see two different sets of wheels, and you'll also see innovation that changed the theme park industry forever. Because this was the first, but it was far from being the last. And this ride system would end up getting replicated in nearly every theme park in every country around planet Earth. So yet another thing that was invented here at home in Disneyland that has found its way all around the globe. The inspiration from Disneyland never stops making its way into various projects that Disney and non-Disney folks work on till this day. Probably one of the greatest tricks of the Matterhorn is that every single day it fools people that inside of Anaheim, there's a mountain covered in snow that they know that they can go in and have one of two adventures on the way back down. If you think about it, it is absolutely what Disney and Imagineering does best: suspend disbelief. We're inside of Disneyland, everything is real. And yes, it's 1/100th to the size of the real Matterhorn, but that doesn't stop it from feeling real to all of us inside of our hearts. And when the Matterhorn was finally finished at a cost of $1.5 million, or about $15 million today, Admiral Joe Fowler said to Walt Disney, "Next time we have to build a mountain, let's let God do it." Friends, thank you so much for riding the Matterhorn, talking all about the design and the idea that changed not only Disneyland, but theme parks all around the world forever. Hope you enjoyed today's look at the Matterhorn. I hope to keep doing these type of fun history design vlogs. So if you enjoyed it, make sure to comment below, because I'm thinking about doing one about the monorail, and I'll do it if enough of you tell me that you'll show up to watch it, because this is pretty niche content. People are looking for information about the new popcorn bucket. They don't care about the Matterhorn. Thank you so much for showing up and being a part of today's adventure. I can't wait to see you back here real soon on the edge of the Matterhorn Trail.